Hello everyone and welcome to ZP Productions. I'm Richard and today we will be doing this shot you see here. So this shot was taken some time back, about 3 months. We had a shoot. I had a shoot with Ria. Was there to test out a new camera, and so we took this shot here. This shot was done at Marina Bay Sands with a 50mm equivalent lens and shot at about f2.2 to f2 equivalent for this particular shot itself. So this shot is done with the sun to the right, as you can see in the diagram, and the camera is actually quite low to the ground. The sun is off camera, as you can see the angle of view. The sun is actually off camera so that it doesn't flare into the lens. So you know, if the sun is actually within the shot itself, it will cause certain amount of flaring, and that's probably not what you want. So in addition to that, as what I said in my previous video, this was shot with the similar technique where I exposed the sky to approximately the brightest before it starts clipping, and I let the clouds clip just a little bit. For more information of this, look at the link somewhere in the screen. It will lead you to the previous video. If you can't find the link on the screen, then look at the link below. So we will now actually begin editing this shot itself. So let's look at the shot itself. This is of course the after, and let's look at the comparison before and after. Actually, if you notice, right, this shot isn't really that dark in terms for the model. Ria was actually quite well lit because the deck is actually wood and it's a bit like bleach wood, so it's actually reflecting quite a bit of light onto her, and it's a bright daylight. The sun is actually from the top right, and you know, it's reflecting quite a bit of light. Okay, so now I'll just reset this shot and then we will go through the editing one by one on how I actually obtain this. Okay, so let's go. Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this shot is, as I said, done during the bright daylight with similar technique as the previous video. So the first thing I of course want to do is let's get back some of the sky here because it's a little bit bright. So let's return the color to the sky. Similarly, like the previous video, we reduce highlights. And then we want to brighten Ria up just a little bit. So in this case, we will bring up the shadow just a little bit. Okay, so just to show you the effect, if you actually bring up the shadow too much, it's a bit weird. In fact, it makes the jacket a bit of contrast, and I don't think that is what you want. So we will actually maybe just increase it by about 26. And then, you know, it's still a little bit dark. So this is where we go back to exposure on top and then brighten it just a little bit, while still making sure that, you know, the sky is still blue so that we can do something about it later. So let's look at it, about 30, 0.336, about there. Okay, so now with the exposure and the general brightness of the picture soft, we will do the next few steps. So unlike the last time, we will talk about clarity here. So clarity, you can say, is quite close to contrast, but it's selective. It only affects the edges of items. So in the latest Lightroom, there's even texture. So texture actually affects the things like a very minute level of contrast that is found in like the skin, the clothes, and if you reduce texture greatly, you look very soft. While if you reduce clarity greatly, you look like it's glowing. For example, like this, you know, it's glowing. Okay, so for this shot itself, this was done actually before Lightroom patch, so there was only a clarity slider then. So for this shot, I actually used about 29 clarity. Okay, about 29 clarity. So let's zoom in to let you see what clarity does. So you notice clarity actually does a little bit of brightening on selected area. That's because it's actually increasing contrast, so the brighter area turns slightly brighter and more contrasty. Clarity mainly affects the edges, as you can see here, all the different edges. So if I drop it and I increase it, look at the pens, I drop it and I increase it. So this area here, you notice all the details and the lines actually become, they seem sharper. That is the purpose of clarity. And as a picture on a whole, what it does is clarity actually makes things a bit more scrungy and give the shot a little bit more pop. So in this case, clarity is about 20 plus when I actually edited it previously. Now, this shot, if you have looked at the original, let me load up the shot somewhere here. Okay, I'll put in the video. Now let's compare. This shot is actually relatively vibrant. So of course, in the editing, we will make it vibrant too. Okay, now looking at the vibrance. Okay, so what's different in vibrance and saturation? Saturation does a whole picture level shifting of colors, while vibrant, it does a selective saturation where the less vibrant area will turn more bright and vibrant, while the already vibrant area will actually not become so vibrant. So it's like lifting up the shadows equivalents for saturation. So vibrance here, as you can see, it actually increases the general blueness of the buildings and the sky, and while also bringing back saturation to the subject. Okay, so for vibrance in this shot, it's about 70 plus to give you really the high vibrant look, but not the oversaturated look, because vibrance is a bit more selective, so it only brings out the lower saturated area upwards, while the already saturated area will stop reducing in terms of saturation, so give a bit more balance in the shot. Okay, so I won't be touching saturation for this shot itself. So going down, this is actually the tone curve. For this shot, I just want it to have a bit more contrast, but not throughout the shot. I just want the contrast to be more in the shadows. So tone curve is a good way to do it. If you actually click one dot here and then one more dot, then you just bring the bar slightly lower. You notice actually the highlights, the brighter areas don't actually shift contrast much. The lower areas actually become slightly darker and more contrasty. So this is actually one way to use the tone curve. So for this case, I actually push it slightly down, increase the contrast for the darker regions. Okay, so that is tone curve. We will move down lower below. For this shot itself, nothing much to say about hue. I did actually shift the hue slightly for the red. So slightly for the red, because if you look at the skin here, shifting the hue will actually give me a tone that I prefer. But because actually I want to retain the orange in the pens, let's zoom out a little bit for this shot. So I can actually shift much of the hue, because if you actually shift a lot of the hue, especially in the orange tone, it actually changes it quite a bit. So I probably can only shift the red. So in this case, I just want to shift the red tone in the face a little bit, so that it's not so orange color looking and not so reddish color looking in fact. A bit more orangey, greenish, a bit tint of it, to have the more correct feel of what skin tone is. Okay, from then the hue is done. So we will look at the rest of the image itself. We will move down to saturation. So for saturation, what will happen is that we want to have less red in the shot, because if you see the original picture, her skin tone is actually slightly a bit more lighter orange. So usually in this case, the easiest way is to deset the red. Well, when you deset the red, what happens is that the orange intensity drops a little. Don't do it too much, because actually you affect the lips. So just drop the saturation of the red a little, and if you notice the skin tone actually reduce a bit of readiness and actually gives a bit more orangey, pale orangey tone. Okay. Now, as I say once again, because of the pens is orange, we really can't shift saturation a bit too much. So for this case, I'll just shift it slightly, maybe -9. So notice that the pens don't change much. The skin tone is now slightly less saturated in terms of orange color. So how this saturation came about is because initially when you raise vibrance, right, it actually also increased the vibrance of the skin. So sometimes that's a bit undesirable. So you have to reduce it in the further bars below. Okay. Now, if we look at the sky, the initial shot, the sky, the buildings were actually quite bluish, quite high saturation and vibrance. So in that case, that's what we're going to do now. We will actually shift the saturation of the blue and the aqua up. So this gives you that punch in the shot. Okay, so now you notice the blue is very, very punchy and very strong in terms of color tones. Okay, and now we go down to the last part, which is luminance. For this luminance itself, we increase the red. So this red, as I say, it continues on the whole concept of First, we deset red, we shift the hue, and this all affects the skin tone. So increasing red normally will also make the skin slightly brighter in certain areas, reducing the redness in the shot itself for the skin. Now, this is not always correct, so test out, because as I say in my previous video also, that skin tone is usually red, orange, or yellow, and at times magenta. It's usually always orange and yellow, orange, or red. So in this case, it's a bit orange and red. So you have to try out based on your shot. So for this case, there's some red in it. So I will increase the red luminance to make the skin a bit brighter. Then I also increase the orange luminance. And orange has a big effect on the skin, if you can see here. It also has an effect on the pants itself. So we won't shift it too much, by about 20 something, 30. That's about it. Okay, so you got the rough shot here. So we look at the buildings behind. The buildings are very deep blue, so we want a bit of brightness to them also. So we increase the blue a bit. Just make sure that the sky don't get blown out. That'll be fine already. Okay. So we just increase the blue slightly. So for me, there's one trick that I like to do when, let's say, I want to increase vibrance around the shot but don't affect skin tone that much, and that is to go down all the way to calibration and increase saturation for the green and the blue primaries. I can show you the example now. So let's say we do increase the saturation. You notice that interestingly is that the orange tones don't shift that much, but every other tone gets a bit more vibrant, right? So this is actually a good way to play and increase vibrancy. The other tones actually increase way more than the orange tone. Okay. Now don't overdo it because once you shift it above like 20, you will start actually also affecting the orange tone, where you can actually compensate it in the red primaries. So for this case, I will do it here. I'll zoom in the face a bit and I compensate it in the red primary. So I'll just reduce the red primary just a little bit of saturation and also shift the hue a little bit so that it gets me back to that orange, greenish, slight tint of green look that I'm looking for the skin. Okay, so now the shot itself, in terms of general color and feel, is there. So I'm going to fix up the last few parts of the things, as we have seen in the previous video. Firstly, the sky here is a little too dark. That's because the sun is actually from the right side. So because Singapore sky has a little bit of clouds all year round, so actually the sun results in a certain amount of scattering of light. So the area with the sun is always slightly brighter, slightly more hazy look compared to the area without the sky itself, without the sun, I mean. So in this case, we will actually increase the exposure on the right side, just a little. So in this case, so this will even out the sky to a certain extent. And then now we will tackle the main subject itself. Okay, so firstly, I would like to light up her face just a little. So in this case, I go back into the radar filters and I'll apply a 0.2, which is my favorite number. Sorry. So I apply 0.2 and I brighten the skin a bit, brighten the face a little bit more again. Okay, so you can see the face is now just a little bit brighter than the rest. So now, because of the brightness of the face now, automatically your attention is attracted to the face rather than, let's say, to the side of the hip, to the legs. So the brightness of the face does affect it. So just now when you see me brightening the face, right, exposure is one way, but exposure is not always the best way, especially if, let's say, you want to retain a bit of the highlights on the face. So the other way is, of course, to increase your shadows, and it also does similar effect, especially if you shoot it the style where, as I said, you don't actually use reflector nor use any form of artificial lighting. So usually the skin is slightly in the shadows. Now let me talk about this style again. Just to note that it is not only something that can be done with high-end cameras. You can actually do it with most modern full frames today. The Z6, the A7 III can probably also accomplish. Even the XT3 and XT2, I shot something similar before, and you can easily recover the skin tones. 1-2 stops, not an issue. So definitely this technique is usable. Okay. Now, I've already brightened the face just a little, and that's what I want. So we go down, this pants now is very bright orange. So I really want the orange to pop out of the image. So let me brighten this pants up. So let me select the O area right out. again, and for this case we reduce the feather. So if you look at how the thing is covering up the overlays. Okay, now similarly I will use the technique of color range. I'll just dip onto the pants, the orange area, and you notice that it no longer affects the blue, mainly just the orange. Now the hand is a bit affected, so let us reduce the amount, and the amount is about 15, 14, and you will see that only the pants is now highlighted. Okay, in that case, that's about it. Let me go down, go up again, and we will increase the exposure. Let me remove away the masking. Increase the exposure, the pants, and also increase the saturation just a little bit. Okay. Now the pants is bright and orange, just the way we want it. Okay. Okay. Now the pants is bright and orange itself. So so this shot is pretty much nearly done. So the last thing I like to do sometimes is that I want the subject to pop up more in the image. So as I said earlier, clarity does selective contrast, especially the edges. So in this case, I'm going to apply additional clarity, but only at the edges, so that the whole image don't look very scrungy, but the lines, especially the lines surrounding this subject, gets a bit more pronounced. Okay, in this case, let me increase the clarity by, let's say, 50. And then we will start applying to the model itself. Okay. Just make sure that it only applies mainly, to the areas that you want the contrast to increase, and also don't affect the sky too much. Okay. Okay. Okay, so now you notice that the subject is even more popped compared to what it was before. Okay, so this is a quick and easy way, especially to use clarity and use it around the subject's outline, especially those areas that you feel is a bit blur, or should I say merging into the background, and you can use selective clarity, especially using radar or brush, to pop those areas out. Sometimes you don't need to do it, like in certain areas where the contrast is really, really strong, you probably don't need to do it. But those areas that are not very strong in contrast, or the subject looks like it's merging into the background, you can actually try applying this technique, and it may work. Okay. So pretty much the shot is done. So the last thing I want to do is to level the horizon a little. So the thing is that you're shooting from bottom up, so of course the buildings are a little tilted. You can try straightening the buildings, but I tried this earlier, and the shot is not really nice, because actually you also lengthen the model. That's not something what we want, because it gives her a slightly off proportion feeling. So I'll just do mainly leveling in this shot. Okay, so we level up the whole shot itself, and then this shot is pretty much done. So at this time, for this tutorial is completed, but for the actual shot itself, you probably want to do it all the way in Photoshop to actually correct her looks a little, remove things like strands of hair, edit certain things in and out, so that you get a more polished and perfect image. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Do like and subscribe this video, and if you want, you can follow links below in the descriptions to go to my Facebook page or visit my Instagram. I hope you enjoy this, and see you next time.